Hello, my name is Helen Balsdon. I'm Head of Nursing and Chief Nursing Information Officer at Cambridge University Hospitals, a university teaching hospital based in the east of England. Today I'm going to talk to you about the journey we have been on as we've made the transition from nurses and midwives collecting their own quality data to having the electronic patient record do this for us. The question I've posed is, can data change the conversation? And I hope to answer that as we progress. Nurses and midwives strive to deliver safe and effective care to all of our patients. Over time, we've put in place systems to enable us to measure this. There is a growing body of research that shows us that real-time clinical data dashboards and metrics are a true measure of nursing quality and can generate meaningful information that both enable and motivates nurses to improve the care they give and in turn improve the outcomes for our patients. The importance of being able to measure the quality of care is a growing issue internationally. Our process for many years involved nurses and midwives collecting their own data each week. This was done on all of our wards, both adult and paediatric, our critical care units and our emergency department, 56 separate units in total. Each week, a senior nurse would review 5 sets of paper case notes with the aim of having 20 to 25 each month. These would be reviewed and assessed against 31 separate standards. The internal auditor would then be sent this piece of paper and enter it into a spreadsheet. This in turn would be sent to our digital team, who would enter the data onto the business intelligence tool, making it available across the organisation in a digital format around 4 to 6 weeks later. This whole process was part of our ward-to-board assurance framework, and the evidence was discussed at every meeting with the ward, the division, and reported across the organisation. The volume of metrics grew over time and could be flexed as new issues and problems emerged. The process itself was rarely challenged, despite widespread recognition that there was variability in the degree of professional judgment being applied and a very clear decision being made at which patients' notes to review. However, there was significant time being spent challenging data integrity, as nurses and midwives didn't recognise the results and they weren't able to validate them against patient records. There was little time, if any, spent using the data to improve the care we gave. The opportunity to change this process came when we implemented an enterprise-wide electronic patient record. Our ambition was to digitally generate data and release time to care. We wanted to stop our nurses auditing. We wanted to remove objectivity and use the core documentation that we recorded in our day-to-day practice to provide the data required that would measure the quality. In doing so, we want to involve and engage nurses in what quality meant, what questions should be asked, what topics would she look like, and why were we doing it. We particularly had to involve some of our key stakeholders. We identified these as the nurses working in a specialist role. They were often the subject matter experts and were very used to setting content, and we weren't going to be able to collect 31 different questions as we started this new process. But we were very clear we wanted to get to a place where we could see 100% of our patients and assess quality of the documentation care that they had been given. The new process is outlined in the slide below. Essentially, we would ask nurses and midwives to collect the normal documentation, and we would extract that automatically every night from the electronic patient record and pull that into the Trust Business Intelligence tool. This information would be available to nurses the next day. So essentially, we were able to give 24-hour data so that nurses could see as much real time as possible. In the initial phase, the one that I've called here phase 1, there was little interest, or in fact the digital data was generally ignored. In exploring that with nurses, they were very clear that why would they bother looking at it when they weren't asked about it in any way. Instead, all they were asked about was the paper record. They didn't have time to look at both sets, so therefore they would focus on the one that they knew they were going to be asked questions about. It's quite understandable, really. It's also important to point out at this point that what we were seeing was something very different. We had seen the paper audit showing us we had brilliant compliance with all of our quality metrics. By contrast, the digital data was showing a very different picture and was showing generally very poor compliance. And this could only really be seen when you started looking at the two different data sets side by side. The Nursing and Midwifery Executive Committee had started looking at what we should do and how we should move this forward. And they made a decision that we were only going to change this if we started actively using the digital data. So they made a decision to switch that off. And that's when we started entering what I've described as phase 2. In those initial few weeks, when we started asking nurses to stop collecting paper metrics and move to using the digital dashboards, we had many, many questions. They started challenging the data. They challenged the definitions until they were assured that the data integrity was correct, and they could see exactly where they had documented something in the electronic patient record and how that translated to the results they were seeing in their nursing quality metrics. That process took 2 to 3 months, so none of this was a quick win. Phase 3, which is where we are now, we see very different picture. There is active daily use of the data. We see that when we visit and listen to safety huddles that are happening in the clinical areas, where they're actually asking questions about the data. Have we done this? Why haven't we done this? What were the issues? They're also asking questions about how can they use the data to improve the care they have? Why do we have the same approach for every single patient? Why can't we do it differently? A clear example came up when we were exploring the moving and handling assessment. Previously, we had required that assessment to be completed in its entirety, which was around 15 questions for each and every single patient. But the question was posed of why are we doing that for independent patients, especially if they're not at risk of falls and we're not expecting their independence to be impacted in any way during an admission. It was a very fair and valid question, and from that there was agreement, again from the Nursing and Midwifery Executive Group, that we would pilot making an assessment of a person's independence as part of that process, which we duly did. This enabled us to use the data to reduce the burden of documentation. In the time that we've made this transition, what's become really clear is that a number of different lessons have been learnt. But before I get to that, I want to talk about what we've actually achieved, what our outcomes were. We now have accurate real-time information for 100% of our inpatient population that is refreshed every 24 hours. There is a high degree of confidence in our data and improved knowledge and skill to utilise that information to drive improvements to care. We've improved productivity and efficiency, and we've released nurses to care. In financial terms, that's over £54,000 a year in nursing and midwifery time by just removing the need to undertake a manual audit. We also have a more robust process and standardised approach to creating new nursing and midwifery metrics, all with detailed definitions and stronger governance arrangements in place to support this. But most importantly, we've increased compliance with care standards, which we think was at the heart of what we were trying to achieve. As I've mentioned, we have learnt a number of lessons along the way. Nurses and midwives want accurate data to drive improvements to the care they give. They want to be involved and they want to be engaged, and it's important that that's every group of nursing and midwives, not just a few. But there always needs to be a mechanism to challenge the data and ask questions. The computer is not always right. And it's all important to embed the work any new work in reporting structures so that it's actively used and discussed. It also ensures there's ownership at all levels of the organisation. And I would always say as well, start with just a few measures, get the process right, get the definitions right, and build that over time. So have we changed the conversation? Data can absolutely change the conversation, but more importantly, it can also support and enable great conversations about the quality of care we give and the outcomes that our patients have from this. Many thanks for listening. If you have any questions or would like to know more about the work we've been doing, please do not hesitate to contact me.